Welcome to RCR Wireless News. I'm Martha DeGrasse, and I'm here with Allen Proithis. He is president of Sigfox North America. Allen, thanks so much for making the time today.
Oh, thanks for chatting today.
We hear so much this year in particular from the wireless carriers about Category M1. So what does that mean for your low-power wide area network solution? You've been in place for a while. You've been building out cities all over America. What does the new low-power wide area cellular technology mean for your value proposition?
Well, I think it's a great validation that the operators realize that the 3G and 4G are great technologies. We use them every day, but they're not really suited for connecting things since they were created to connect people. And so CAT-M is an effort to sort of take the core technology they have, strip it down a little bit to make it a little less expensive, a little bit better on the battery. So I think it's validation from the carrier side that there's this massive market that you need specialized technology for. But frankly, it's completely different than what we're doing. And what we're doing in the LPWAN space is actually highly complementary to not only 3G, 4G, CAT-M, but even narrowband IoT. In that they're basically taking, again, a great technology and trying to make it leaner. But if you start on a truck chassis, you still got a truck chassis at the end of the day. With all the intellectual property expenses. I mean, I think Ericsson announced a couple weeks ago, narrowband IoT, just their intellectual property licensing will be somewhere between $2.50 and $5 per device. That's actually more than our module cost per device. So we're really set up to be extremely cost efficient on both hardware and connectivity costs, extremely efficient on the battery. And the trade-off is you just get a little bit of data. So, but for many things, that's all you need. So we're really addressing a very different market where they're addressing somewhere in the middle.
Okay, great. So roughly what is your module cost per device?
So we've announced in the fall, we've actually got it down to in Europe, it's less than $2 for a module. And in FCC markets, it's actually less than $3 for the module. Okay? So, and we expect that to continue to go down. So what we basically did is, in working with our partners, is basically jump the cost curve about 3 years.
Okay, yeah.
So we'll continue to go down from there. It's actually been an incredibly successful program because, you know, when you're talking about the kind of things that LPWAN deals with, it's usually lower cost assets that, again, they whisper rather than shout data. They have something to say. And cumulatively, when you start connecting tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of these things, the data has incredible value as a mass together. But you can't spend more for the connectivity than you're spending to actually make the asset you're tracking. And that's really the challenge. We all love our cell phones. We love watching HD YouTube videos like this one. But you probably charged your phone in the last 24 hours, right? And it costs a lot of money. It costs more per month than you would spend on our connectivity over a period of a few years. And so it's a great thing, but it was really built for something else.
So what are some of the vertical industries where you're finding the most traction?
It's funny that when you hear about all these grand projections about IoT, and I love all these analyst projections, I love all these big numbers, and it almost doesn't matter which number you believe, whether it's tens of billions, hundreds of billions the next couple of years. No one ever asks the next question is, well, how do they actually connect? Because you can't afford to do it with the current technologies. So the kind of verticals that are especially ripe for a low-cost wide area connection technology are industries that have lots of stuff producing little data. So a primary example of that is asset tracking. It's one thing if you have $1 million piece of farm equipment, certainly put a 4G modem on there and it's exactly the right solution. But when you talk about the average farm tractor has 10 dumb implements that plug into it, that you may only use a couple times a year, and farmers tend to be busy guys. Well, where are all those other things? You know, even finding those simple things. So agriculture tends to be an important space for us because the sensors in that space have now matured enough where it's more than just moisture. You can track nitrates. You can know how much fertilizer you should put on, when you should put it on. And you have a record you can show the EPA saying, look, we haven't poisoned the streams by putting on 5 times the amount because we didn't know what was going on with plants. Asset tracking is becoming a huge space, though, in general, more logistics-oriented. We talk about there's 3 billion pallets in the world. There's lots of new regulations of tracking the whole lifespan of food, from the time that egg comes from the chicken to the time it hits your omelet. What happens to that lettuce? And it starts with, you know, where's my stuff? And it very quickly gets to, well, what was the condition of that stuff during transit? temperature, vibration, humidity, many other things, light for certain things, perhaps measuring certain gases. But then you get into other things, whether it's, for instance, medicines. Look at the cost of medicine today. Thank goodness I don't need a whole lot of it myself, but when you start shipping medicines, if a refrigerator in a pharmacy goes bad, they have to throw out $50,000 to $100,000 worth of medication. And you can't even have your retail clerk throw it away because it's all regulated. So the pharmacist, the most expensive person in the whole store, is the one that has to get their hands on it and clean the fridge out. And then just imagine the life cycle of those medicines from the time they leave a factory to the time they get to the destination, being able to have an audit trail, a quality trail. So there's many, many things like this where people would love to know what's going on with them through the whole life cycle, but never have the technology to hit the price constraints, to hit the battery constraints, and have the ease of use around, don't worry about configuration. You're not depending upon someone to constantly be aware if the Wi-Fi router has to be reset.
Okay, great. So with asset tracking and agriculture, you're talking about some fairly remote locations. So what type of range do users get with your radius?
Well, it depends. Agriculture is certainly very rural, but actually asset tracking, because you think about where are those assets going when you're shipping through major warehouses. And if you look at maps of warehouses in the U.S., they're all clustered in all the ring roads around every major city in the U.S. So there you actually pick up some pretty large populations. And our technology, because it's a ultra narrowband technology, it works very differently than many other things out there. And the distance you cover is greatly dependent upon the topography and trees and buildings. But generally speaking, we get exceptional coverage. So for every one antenna site we'd have to put up, you typically would have to put up 15 to 20 conventional cellular sites, depending on the topography. It's one of the reasons in Europe we're even used as the backup for 3G alarm systems by the #1 home security system provider in Europe, Securitas Direct. And the reason is one, we have really good indoor penetration because of it being ultra narrowband. And because the way it's frequency agile and jumps around, it's extremely difficult to jam. So right now you can have some bad guys go buy cheap 3G jammers online. When they go to rob your house, no alarms go out. So they like that. So having us as a really low-cost fallback, you're never going to use us for video or audio or things like that. But having that fallback that you know is going to work no matter what, it's very cheap insurance to simply bake in lots of things. So the radius could be anywhere from tens and tens of miles radius, if you get out in some of these agricultural situations, to a handful of miles in a very dense city. It really depends. But basically, the ratio is for every one of our antennas, it's about 15 to 20 that would be needed for cellular. The one other thing I'll mention is that we all are sort of used to driving down the road and seeing cellular towers and monopoles growing up like weeds everywhere we look. It's just amazing how many of these things there are out there. And when we're talking about our technology, we're not talking about anything like that. It's not big chunks of metal with hanging all over like this. It's one little antenna that's about the size of my arm from the elbow up. It's about 27 inches. And it's the actual equipment, the access point we use, is most of the time referred to as a lunchbox. And we actually have pictures of this next to a lunchbox because it's the same size, but a little thinner, just to give people a sense. So it's not this big, heavy metal thing. So this gives us incredible flexibility of how we go about our deployments.
Sure. And do you deploy these on rooftops, on cell towers? Where do you deploy these?
A little bit of everything. So we do have relationships with some of the major tower providers because they've been doing this for a long time and they happen to have stuff in exactly the right place quite often. But the nice thing is we don't have to develop a majority of the network with these kind of people because their cost basis tends to be optimized for the traditional cellular market. And for us to fulfill our value proposition, we need the flexibility to really deploy on a variety of sites. So lots of rooftops, lots of other types of assets. Because of the low cost of the equipment and because of the extremely low power needs and the extremely low footprints, it becomes very easy for us to use almost anything to deploy on.
Okay, great. Now I know that you've been building out in cities all over the U.S. Can you give us an update on that?
Sure, we've been moving along pretty quickly. We ended last year covering about 20% of the U.S. population. And we've covered a good chunk of the big cities now. I mean, New York's been covered for over a year. I was just there yesterday. It was great walking around, pushing my button, walking all over Manhattan and watching the signal go through. But frankly, you can go in a 100-mile circle around Chicago right now and have really good coverage. LA probably has more antenna sites than anywhere in the country right now. And San Francisco and the Bay Area is where we started, but we also have great coverage now in Atlanta, Houston, Austin. We're really going very quickly in many places now. And a lot of that is really being driven by customer demand.
So the cities where you've built out the most are the cities where you have the most customers?
Exactly. And now what's happening is when you get into some of the more rural applications, like around agricultural or even energy, then you go to those more rural areas. So the customer mix actually drives the mix of population coverage. So in the IoT world, because remember, if you read all the analyst articles, they're all telling us for every person out there, there's anywhere from 1 to a couple hundred devices that will connect to an IoT. Remember how crazy it was when there was a greater than a 1-to-1 density of mobile phones to people a few years ago? And in some countries, it was like getting to 1.5 or 2-to-1, and we were all scratching our heads like, how could that ever happen? And now we're talking about a business that has a couple hundred things to people. So we really don't have a metric like we do in more mature cellular wireless to address these kind of things. So we tend to talk in terms of POPs, covered population, and you talk in terms of connected devices. But there isn't really a direct translation all the time.
Yeah. So you started in Europe. You're a French company, is that right?
That's correct.
So about how much of your business is now in the United States, would you say?
A minority percentage, because we've only been at the network a little over a year here. In Europe, they've been building the network for about 3 years. So most of Western Europe is covered. And if you add up all the coverage we have, we've announced 32 countries at this point that either have deployed or are in deployment stage. So out of those 32 countries, the ones that have been going the longest are Western Europe. So whether you go to Spain or France or Ireland or Belgium or Portugal, it's pretty much 90% plus coverage in all those places, sometimes 95. And so then you have other places that are coming up just behind those, like Germany. But generally speaking, Western Europe is pretty well covered at this point. We've announced some really big deals, though. For instance, Japan now just was announced in the last couple of months with a partnership with KDDI. And that's the normal way we deploy. We have a local partner, where Sigfox is really the technology provider in the background. But we have a local partner that has an exclusive, almost like a franchise right for that country. They get the gear from us, they get the sites, they get the customers, and we run the whole back-end ecosystem, billing, those kind of things. And it's been a very successful model that allows us to run many countries in parallel, that we have to enable our partners, but we don't have to do all the heavy lifting ourselves. The US is the one exception outside of Europe where Sigfox is also the network operator. Because we felt it was such a strategic market, we wanted to get going really quickly. As you probably know, too, we've raised a lot of money. We've announced we've raised over $300 million. It sounds like a lot, but it's a big planet. But it is enough money for us, especially with our model, to move pretty quickly.
That's great. And do you anticipate any partnerships with U.S. carriers?
Well, I anticipate a lot of U.S. partnerships. The question is, we welcome working with carriers in a number of different forms, but we're not dependent upon working with carriers because IoT is a whole different ballgame. And frankly, the demand from enterprise technology companies, non-traditional sites, all kinds of sort of partners you wouldn't think about are dying to have a larger participation in the space. So we have quite a few expressions of interest we see that are frankly increasing over time. And you'll probably see us sorting through some of the things over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, great. And finally, how do you differentiate yourself from the other dedicated low-power wide area network providers that we see?
Oh, you mean someone else is doing this too?
There might be a couple, yeah.
So I think the big difference is that we're conceived from the very beginning as a public IoT network. And I think the biggest difference with the main other company that's doing this, it tends to be more of a Wi-Fi model. We build a box, put up a box. And but you ever go check for Wi-Fi in a big city or try to set up Wi-Fi in an office in a big city where you have 40 Wi-Fi boxes hammering and it's like impossible to get a signal through? that's pretty much the philosophy of our main LP-WAN competitor, where I think it was designed and it does a good job on campus type deployments, but doesn't have a concept of roaming, bandwidth management, and frankly has a very tiny device ecosystem. So it definitely has its place, but the big difference is Sigfox is designed as a truly public IoT network, global IoT network. So that's why we have $2 and $3 modules, depending on what part of the world you're in. That's why we have a much, much larger ecosystem of end devices. And that's why we have a system where you can make that thing, and then if you can go from here to Brazil, and it works just the same.
Yeah.
You know, and that has a lot of value when you're a large company shipping products all over the world, that you can do less SKUs, you have one throat to choke, you know exactly how your connectivity is going to work, and we're a very small part of the total cost of an IoT solution, but you know, without us, nothing else happens. We're the transport. So it's an important part, even though it's a very small part. So I think we're addressing the market in very, very different ways, and I think over time, you'll probably see us evolving to the larger, much higher volume deals, where hardware cost, scale, and flexibility is much more important. I think you'll see our main LP-WAN competitor more in a space of smaller campus deals. I just want to buy a couple antennas, throw them up, and run my own little private bubble that nobody else comes in or out of. That's something that they're probably well suited for.
Okay, great. Anything else you think is important to discuss here? I
just think, you know, we tend, when we talk about LP-WAN or anything else in IoT, you know, like you go to a trade show, you tend to see a lot of hardware, or you tend to see, you know, a lot of the enabling type infrastructure. But I think the thing to keep in mind is that IoT is really about enabling people to get data that they never had access before. And then once you have that data, you get a whole new set of insights to reduce costs and drive revenues. And I think it's easy to lose sight of the value of the data that's enabled by all this fun we're having, versus, you know, and that's where we should be focusing. The enabling technology, a couple of years from now, we'll forget about it like we do plumbing it out, if we do our job right. And we'll really focus on the business benefit that we're really helping enable with this work.
So that's a good point then. Do you integrate with any of the cloud platforms that analyze and process and store all this data?
Pretty much all the big boys, because you know, for them, it's very important, whether it's Microsoft Azure, AWS, many others. It's really all about how can they get more data to provide higher value to their customers. And so from the ground up, that's been a critical importance to us to make sure we're integrated with all these big guys, because that's how you get value at actually going through the work of implementing one of these solutions. So as much as we all talk, we're a network provider, we end up spending a lot of time on the hardware side to enable things to be on the network, but it's all about the data.
All about the data. All right, Allen Proithis, President Sigfox North America. Thank you so much for your time today.
All right, thank you.